Good evening. You're now with me, Anigui, for TVS Nightline. We begin with breaking news. Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim just announced that the government has agreed to implement a work-from-home policy for ministries, agencies and government-linked companies beginning April 15th. He says the decision made by the Cabinet is aimed at reducing fuel consumption and secure the country's energy supply.
In a special address tonight, he said the details will be announced soon on the policy meant to minimize the impact of the war in West Asia.
Dalam masa yang sama, saya ingin tegaskan bahawa kerajaan bertindak menampan impak krisis tenaga global ini menerusi inisiatif sokongan rakyat. Berapa jumlah belanja untuk menyerap impak minyak yang meningkat ini? 4 bilion ringgit satu bulan.
Anwar also said the government is open to proposals from all sides, including traders and fishermen hit hard by the conflict.
In other news, the Ministry of Domestic Trade and Cost of Living, KPDN, has ensured the fuel supply remains sufficient to meet public demand through an effective nationwide daily monitoring system. KPDN Enforcement Director General Dato' Azman Adam says there have been no fuel shortages so far, despite increased demand at several petrol stations following the recent festive season.
Sebenarnya tak ada isu kekurangan langsung dalam Malaysia kita lah. Sebenarnya tak ada isu dalam kita monitor setiap hari stesen minyak yang satu mengalami kenaikan ni, satu yang mungkin ada sedikit masalah penghantaran dan sebagainya, kita monitor hari-hari. Setakat ni memang kita tidak ada apa-apa isu kekurangan bekalan dalam negara kita.
As a precaution, Azman says KPDN will step up monitoring by deploying officers on the ground at petrol stations seeing sudden demand surges. He warns that firm action will be taken against both individual operators and oil companies that breach regulations.
Kita akan membuat siasatan di bawah Akta Kawalan Bekalan. Jadi Akta Kawalan Bekalan ni dendanya untuk kesalahan kalau bagi operator persendirian boleh didenda sehingga RM1 juta atau 3 tahun penjara untuk kesalahan pertama. Untuk syarikat boleh didenda sehingga RM2 juta. Dan satu lagi, kami turut akan membuat siasatan di bawah AMLA.
Malaysia is moving to plug leakages in its subsidy system, as the Ministry of Domestic Trade and Cost of Living, KPDN, is enforcing a strict ban on the sale of RON 95 petrol to foreign-registered vehicles. The move, effective today, is designed to ensure taxpayer-funded subsidies benefit only Malaysian citizens while cracking down on cross-border fuel smuggling. KPDN Director General of Enforcement, Dato' Azman Adam, says new legislation will now target both illegal buyers and complicit sellers.
Sebenarnya tak ada isu kekurangan langsung dalam Malaysia kita lah. Sebenarnya tak ada isu dalam kita monitor setiap hari stesen minyak yang satu mengalami kenaikan ni, satu yang mungkin ada sedikit masalah penghantaran dan sebagainya, kita monitor hari-hari. Setakat ni memang kita tidak ada apa-apa isu kekurangan bekalan dalam negara kita.
As a precaution, Azman says KPDN will step up monitoring by deploying officers on the ground at petrol stations seeing sudden demand surges. He warns that firm action will be taken against both individual operators and oil companies that breach regulations.
Kita akan membuat siasatan di bawah Akta Kawalan Bekalan. Jadi Akta Kawalan Bekalan ni dendanya untuk kesalahan kalau bagi operator persendirian boleh didenda sehingga RM1 juta atau 3 tahun penjara untuk kesalahan pertama. Untuk syarikat boleh didenda sehingga RM2 juta. Dan satu lagi, kami turut akan membuat siasatan di bawah AMLA.
The government assures that the finding of the investigation into the share ownership issue involving MACC Chief Commissioner Tan Sri Azam Baki will be made public once the probe is complete. Communications Minister Dato' Fahmi Fadzil says the investigation also covers new allegations reported by international media regarding a possible link between the MACC chief and corporate manipulation.
Tuduhan dakwaan yang dibuat oleh sebuah media antarabangsa yang menyatakan kemungkinan wujud hubung kait di antara Tan Sri Azam dan manipulasi korporat. Maka seperti yang telah dijelaskan oleh pihak AMLA pada hari Isnin baru-baru ini, yang mana proses siasatan itu masih berjalan. Maka untuk tujuan itu, kita perlu pastikan kesiasatan tersebut selesai sepenuhnya sebelum apa-apa tindakan lanjut.
Fahmi, who also serves as the Unity Government spokesperson, says the government remains committed to ensuring the findings are announced transparently once the investigation concludes. He further adds that the decision to disclose the results depends on cabinet consideration after the process is finalized.
The upgrade of facilities at the Immigration, Customs, Quarantine and Security Complex in Sungai Tujuh is now in its final stage of completion. Sarawak Transport Minister Dato Sri Lee Kim Shin says operations are expected to begin on May 1st to expedite movement at the border and ease congestion along the state's northern entryway.
We must start operation by 1st May. Kerana lepas itu kita juga kami menyambut hari gawai itu. Dan juga ada cuti-cuti dan pelawat-pelawat yang masuk ke Sungai Tujuh ini tetap akan menambah. Dan jikalau tidak siap, maka masalah kesesakan lalu lintas akan berlaku lagi.
He adds that several final improvements are still underway, including air conditioning modifications, completion of electrical works at public restrooms, and adjustments to facilities at immigration and custom counters. Kim Shin also stresses that close monitoring will continue to ensure the project meets specifications and is ready for use ahead of the festive season.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has signalled that Britain will pivot towards the European Union after weeks of taunts from US President Donald Trump over the UK's stance on the war in Iran. Starmer says building stronger economic and defence ties with Europe would be at the centre of an EU-UK summit in Brussels in the summer.
So, in the coming weeks, we will announce a new summit with our EU partners. And I can tell you that at that summit, the UK will not just ratify existing commitments made at last year's summit. We want to be more ambitious. Closer economic cooperation, closer security cooperation, a partnership that recognises our shared values, our shared interest, and our shared future.
Meanwhile, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, in a special national address this evening, urged Australians to save on fuel amid the global energy crisis.
You should go about your business and your life as normal. Enjoy your Easter. And if you're hitting the road, don't take more fuel than you need. Just fill up like you normally would. Think of others in your community, in the bush, and in critical industries. And over coming weeks, if you can switch to catching the train or bus or tram to work, do so. That builds our reserves and it saves fuel for people who have no choice but to drive.
Now, tensions across the Middle East continue to escalate as military strikes, economic shocks and diplomatic uncertainty shaped the conflict. Lorenzo Isaac brings us more details on the matter.
Thank you, Handy. Tehran was rocked by a fresh wave of explosions as US President Donald Trump said the war with Iran could end within 2 to 3 weeks. The conflict began with coordinated US and Israeli airstrikes across Iran, killing its supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and rapidly expanding into a regional war that sends oil and gas prices soaring and threatens the global economy. Trump, whose stance shifts between combative and conciliatory, says the fighting could end within 2 weeks, maybe 3, while maintaining pressure through ongoing military operations. Tehran, however, insists there are no ongoing negotiations with the United States and says it has not responded to a reported 15-point proposal from Washington to end the war. That cautious optimism is reflected in global markets where equities rally and oil prices tumble on expectations that conflict may soon conclude. The shift in market sentiment comes after Trump signals a near-term end to U.S. involvement, while Iran's leadership indicates it has the will to bring the conflict to a close. The economic strain of the war continues to build, with U.S. gasoline prices surpassing $4 a gallon for the first time in 4 years, inflation rising in Europe, and governments introducing support measures. Speaking at the White House, Trump says the United States will be leaving Iran very soon, possibly within 2 to 3 weeks, while emphasizing that military objectives are still being pursued and leaving open the possibility of a deal. Even as markets respond positively, the diplomatic picture remains uncertain, with Tehran maintaining a firm stance on negotiations. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi reiterates that there are no negotiations with the United States and that Tehran has not responded to any proposed framework to end war. He says there are no grounds for negotiations at this stage, although some messages have been exchanged indirectly with U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. The conflict, which began on February 28 following strikes that killed Iran's supreme leader, continues to spread across the region. Diplomatic initiatives involving Turkey, Egypt and Pakistan are underway, with reports that Islamabad conveys a 15-point U.S. proposal to Tehran. Iranian media also suggests a possible counter-proposal, but Araghchi dismisses these reports as speculation. He stresses that Iran has zero trust in the United States and will not accept a ceasefire, instead calling for a complete end to the war and reparations. With talks stalled, attention shifts back to Washington's next move on the ground. Trump says U.S. forces will end operations in Iran very soon, pointing again to a timeline of 2 to 3 weeks. He indicates that the withdrawal is not dependent on reaching an agreement with Tehran, even as tensions disrupt key global energy routes, including the Strait of Hormuz. Trump maintains that while a deal remains possible, the United States is prepared to conclude its military campaign independently. Amid the turmoil, a Greenpeace Commission study finds that oil companies are generating more than 80 million euros a day in excess profits within the European Union since the war begins. The report shows that fuel prices at the pump are rising significantly faster than crude oil costs, leading to widening profit margins, particularly for diesel. It estimates that if current trends continue, companies could earn an additional 2.5 billion euros in operating profits for March alone. At the same time, geopolitical tensions are beginning to reshape long-standing alliances. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Washington may re-examine its relationship with NATO once the war concludes. He points to concerns over restrictions on the use of military bases in Europe, questioning the strategic value of the alliance if U.S. forces are unable to operate freely from allied territory. Rubio adds that the final decision will rest with President Trump, noting that NATO's role in supporting U.S. global military reach is now under scrutiny. Meanwhile, the United Nations warns that the ongoing conflict could wipe out all economic growth achieved by Arab states in the past year. Estimates suggest regional GDP could contract significantly, with total losses ranging from 120 to 194 billion US dollars. For Iran, the impact is expected to be more severe, with projections indicating a sharp economic contraction and millions at risk of falling below the poverty line, potentially pushing the poverty rate as high as 41%. That is all the recap for today. Back to you, Handy Goy.
Right, thank you, Lorenzo, for that recap. And those were the updates on TVS Nightline. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.